I'm in between abortion, AI, organized religion, war manufacturing. This season of Doctor Who ain't pulling its punches. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Doctor Who Season 1. That still feels weird to say, but I guess technically is the truth. Anyways, Doctor Who Season 1, the third Season 1 that it's had. This episode titled Boom, written by former showrunner of Doctor Who, Steven Moffat. Very excited to talk about this one for a multitude of reasons. But just something to quick say personally before we get into the meat of this actual review. If you don't follow me over on my main channel or elsewhere, you may not have heard the news, but today, if you're watching this video when it goes live, I just released the official teaser trailer for my own science fiction movie titled Identities, starring the wonderful John Delancey from Star Trek The Next Generation, as well as many other amazing folks like Abigail Thorne from Philosophy Tube, and Jessica Nicole from Fringe, and Maggie Mae Fish from also here on YouTube. Please, if you can, go check out and also share that trailer, because this is very much a indie production that is only going to get seen by word of mouth, and frankly, this project has just been an absolute joy and honestly a dream come true for me for so many reasons, not the least of which is that I get to share it with all of you. Like, that's why I make things. It's why I've wanted to do this for so long, and I've been so nervous to release this trailer and get it to all of you, because it's just, I don't know, it's actually happening, and I'm just excited for y'all to watch it, and thank you to all of you for supporting me to be able to make something like this. It really does mean the world. I actually did a live stream where I released the trailer earlier, and I might have broken down a little bit just from how meaningful it is, and I might do so now. Anyways, enough about me. We can get into Doctor Who in just a second, but just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please go check out the trailer. The link will be down below, and please share it around, and it'll also be on the streaming service Nebula on June 25th is the official release date. So sign up for Nebula if you want to catch the actual film. But beyond all of that, enough about me. Let's get into the Doctor Who of it all. Now, like I said earlier, I am very excited for this episode for a few reasons, not the least of which is Steven Moffat. Now, Steven Moffat, contentious figure within the Doctor Who community. For those of you who don't know, he was a writer for Doctor Who during its sort of modern era under Russell T Davies' first run as showrunner, and then became showrunner himself, starting with Matt Smith, and then ran for 2 Doctors until he finally passed off to Chris Chibnall's even more contentious era of Doctor Who. For me, personally, while I have issues with some of Steven Moffat's tendencies as showrunner, not just in Doctor Who, but in other places, looking at you, Sherlock, and certainly those Moffatisms do, pop up their heads in tiny little bits and pieces within this episode. On the whole, I will say I do really like Steven Moffat's writing, especially on individual episodes. He has some of the best episodes of the original run, Doctor Who under Russell T Davies, I should say. And even while I have some issues with his overall show-running aptitude, like, there are things that I love, there's things that I hate in equal measure, he has some of the best Doctor Who episodes under his run as well, that are individual episodes. So to hear him coming back for an episode of Doctor Who this season, I was very, very excited, with the asterisks of, like, the same problem I have with Russell T Davies coming back, in that I like them both as writers, but, can we get new people in Doctor Who, like new writers coming in instead of, bringing back the old guard? That's a larger discussion. But, just taking Steven Moffat at his face, I was excited for him to come back and do an individual episode. And then the second reason I was super pumped about this episode is that it was a limited location, mainly dialogue-driven episode. And I kind of got that from the trailers. I mean, this is in the trailers. It's right in the beginning of the episode. The Doctor steps on a landmine, has to get out of the landmine, and now we just sort of like have to deal with that with just a very limited location. Those are some of my favorite type of science fiction stories, especially on television. My own movie kind of follows this format in the sense that, like, it's a limited location, a bunch of actors, and it's dealing with big ideas and science fiction setups, but doesn't necessarily have to go big bombast and do a bunch of ridiculous things, a bunch of locations, tons of things going on. It's very much just very focused in on what it's trying to do. And so with all those pieces in play, and I think Doctor Who has had some of the best of those type of episodes, because you've had Midnight, which is a very good example of that. I think probably that's the best example of really in any science fiction TV show. Midnight is fantastic in that regard. A very bottle episode feel, even though this one does kind of use a sci-fi set, it is very bottle episode and feel. And so I was very excited for all of that. And I will say this episode, for the most part, pays it off. I think almost everything that this episode does, I really, really, really loved. There are a couple of things that I'm just sort of like, that doesn't land as well, as a bit frustrating to me, but overall, I thought this was a standout episode and very easily my favorite of the 3 episodes of this season that we've had so far, and arguably probably my favorite episode of, this run of Doctor Who since Russell T Davies came back on, except for maybe Wild Blue Yonder, which also was a type of episode that was a bottle episode and a horror episode, which is, it took a bottle episode to make it horror. Also my favorite, like Eldritch science fiction horror, also my favorite kind of thing as well. So that one just kind of ticks my own personal, ticks more of the check boxes of my personal likes more, Wild Blue Yonder does. But this one is very, very close in that regard. So it might be a personal preference thing, but I particularly love this episode. Getting into some of the nitty gritty here, this episode does a really good job of something that Chris Chibnall sometimes failed to do. Sorry to, go into Chris Chibnall a little bit. But what Stephen Moffat is able to do often is make his side characters feel like fully fleshed out people, even in a few scenes, and give them multifaceted aspects of who they are very quickly, so that it really gut punches you when they get hurt, which is something you really need to be effective at doing in a story like this. And I have to say, like, the father at the beginning of the episode, where you get to see his interaction with his kid, the very quirky, he can smell her, quote unquote, smell her teeth through the communication, but he's also a soldier fighting in a war and a religious figure. So there's just these complicated sides to this guy very instantaneously, and it sets up very effectively the fear that they have about this ambulance and it coming to get him. Like the opening sequence before we even see the Doctor and Ruby is it really it sets up all the pieces that we need to know very, very effectively. It's a little bit longer than I would typically like a cold open of Doctor Who to be. I mean, we've seen other cold opens in Doctor Who history, especially in the modern era, where it sets up the idea quicker. But I think there's a lot of moving pieces that this episode's trying to get conceptually to work that I think having the longer opening does. And that kind of goes to the other thing that I really liked about this episode, in that it tackles... sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but it tackles so many different ideas in a very political way. But actually seems to interconnect them really well, because this episode, what is it taking? It's taking on organized religion. It is taking on AI algorithms. It's taking on weapons manufacturing. It even takes on overtly capitalism. And I'm sure the woke anti-woke brigade are going to get upset about that one. But Doctor Who has always been very explicit in a lot of its politics and has gone after capitalism before. Stephen Moffat himself has written a whole episode under the 12th Doctor, who that was directly about capitalism. So not new for Moffat by any means. And trying to tackle all of those things runs the risk of, I think, doing too much. But I think this episode actually does a good job of hitting all of them enough that you understand what how they're interconnecting, but without it feeling like it's overly burdened by them. And it almost leans into one thing that I dislike, but it saves it by the end, and I'll get there in just a minute. But yeah, I'll touch upon those things in a second, but bring it back. The episode does a good job sort of setting up these, this hospital ambulance algorithm thing going on that kills people when they have an injury, because they're unacceptable in terms of their injuries, which is a very eugenicist, sort of way of viewing people, and the ableism is very, very clear there, and it feels like a very akin to something like the Nazis would do. I'm not saying this is exactly Nazis. It's not all fascism or capitalism or whatever is Nazi or whatever, but it has that same sort of idea of you're going to be injured for even a little while. You're not good enough. Very eugenicist idea. And it's very tragic when this father dies. And we also get to see the other guy die when establishing the landmine. And then it brings in the Doctor. Now, here's one thing that I disliked. I mean, it's fine. Other Doctor Who episodes have done this, but it was a little bit weird to me that the Doctor Ruby just happened to be on this planet. that just happened to be standing there and there at that moment. Again, it's a time travel show, so like he shows up wherever. So the convenience of him being somewhere is just like he's going to be there eventually, because considering how long the Doctor's been alive. But I wish there had been like some impetus for them to be on this planet in this space. Like, why are the Doctor and Ruby just hanging out on a war-torn planet, and also not even opening the door until they hear a scream? Like, it just felt a little bit like they're just sitting there until the moment that he's needed. I just felt like it could have been smoothed out a little bit more to be like, they just happened to arrive at this moment and come on out at this moment. It just, the way it was ordered and how it was presented was a little bit wonky to me. That being said, once the Doctor steps on the landmine, and we have like a good like 20 minutes before any other characters come in, and it's just the Ruby and the Doctor like working off each other. There's so many beautiful moments. The Doctor trying to calm himself through song, Ruby putting herself at risk to give the Doctor a better chance, the Doctor also asking Ruby to go and check and see if there's anyone else hurt before even worrying about himself, saying like, look, I'm still alive, you can go deal with them, even though he's standing on a literal landmine. It's just really wonderful characterization of this Doctor and Ruby in particular. It's just very selfless people. Sorry, my phone is going off, but sorry, people sending congratulations on my movie trailer. Sorry. It's all very good characterization, some big tension and establishing the stakes. All of that was wonderful, and I thought I really adored all of it. And then we get into the other characters that come into the story. So we get this one woman soldier who, is very much, believes in the divinity of everything, and her job and everything, who kind of falls into this situation coming after this little girl. And I really liked the development of these religious soldiers. This is not a new idea from Moffat. He had brought it up, I think, way back in his first season with the 11th Doctor, with, the, like, bishop warriors, in the original Weeping Angel two-parter that he did. I forget the name of those episodes. I forget what those ones are called, but I do like those episodes. At the very least, the first one especially. Regardless, this is not a new concept for him. But he used it to great effect here to talk about, organized religion manipulating people's faith in things, and how it ties into things like this ambulance's AI and this capitalist idea of acceptable losses, and the algorithms just sort of keeping those losses at an acceptable rate, and just doing what it can to just inhumanely follow just the algorithm that is running, and so she ultimately kind of believes in this system, and I think she is very well articulated, someone who's kind of has doubts about it, but ultimately is very much a believer, and kind of has to confront some of her ingrained assumptions throughout this interaction with the Doctor, because she has to kind of reckon with she might die because of the algorithm that's going on here. So I did like that. The element I didn't like was the kid. Unfortunately, I don't remember her name, but the kid was written way too much to me as just very overly childish, and that especially for her age. Maybe if she was a tad younger, I could buy it, but there's just moments where things are going off, guns are being pointed at each other, and the kid's just looking at the AI of her father, being like, "Oh, look, that's a picture of the antelope. Oh man," or "Daddy, I want to see my daddy right now." I'm not trying to be disparaging. A kid would be worried about their dad over all the other stuff going on, but it just it felt overly childish to the point where this kid was just not paying attention to anything going on and was very fixated on these things, that I just did not buy her as a real person, and honestly, she started to grate on me a little bit, especially in moments where it's clearly establishing stuff, like the antelope thing was that meant to be very much establishing that for when the AI goes into the ambulances and tries to disrupt them. So it very much felt like it didn't. It just very much felt like a very cartoonish version of a child, rather than making her feel like a real person, which is a bit sad compared to all the other characters that are very well articulated throughout this episode. The other element I didn't like is when you have the other soldier come up and shoots Ruby, and then tries to fix things, and then he dies as well, right after telling the other girl that he has feelings for her, and they're kind of starting to share those feelings. It felt a bit cruel. And I get what it was going for. It's going for war sucks, and people die in it, and especially when it's a pointless war, which a lot of war war just is awful. But especially in a war, these deaths are pointless and can tear people apart. And I get that it was going for that, but just having this whole element of like, he just about to tell her his feelings and then randomly he was distracted and he dies. You know, and it wasn't even a distraction. The algorithm was fighting back against him. You know, it sets the stakes, but it just felt a little too much like trying to stab you with a knife at that particular moment, that it distracted me a little bit instead of the more earnestly gut-punchy elements of this with the performance with the doctor and also the dad who died at the beginning. So it just felt a little bit too much more of a little bit trying too hard to get to that point than the other elements, and so it was a little bit weaker for me. That being said, the moments that do land, even when Ruby gets shot in that one moment and distracts the ambulance, and then she supposedly dies, you know Ruby's going to be fine. But Ncuti Gatwa's acting during that moment was so on the ball and so good that I invested in it fully emotionally. So like, while I knew Ruby was going to be fine by the end of the episode, he just sold it so well. And both of their acting, Millie Gibson and Ncuti Gatwa's acting this entire episode was amazing and really makes me buy this doctor even more. Ncuti has been so full of life and personality, and I've really liked his doctor even just from the first 4 episodes that we've gotten with him so far, but he really feels like a fully fleshed out character, more so than sadly the 13th Doctor. 14th was David Tennant. 13th Doctor ever really did. Again, apologies to Jodie. She was lovely. Sadly, the writing did not suit her well, but Ncuti gets some more time to shine here, and he feels very full of personality in his acting, and the writing enables that in a really wonderful way. A couple things to also mention here. We get a reference at one point when the doctor is talking to the dad algorithm. He says dad to dad, and uses the dad thing to convince the algorithm to be able to go after the ambulances, which is interesting considering him referring to being a dad is a reference to him being the grandfather of Susan, who got also referenced last episode as well. I didn't bring this up in my review last week because there was a lot to talk about and I kind of forgot about it. It was very offhanded, but this is the second, this one more oblong, but still the second reference to Susan that we've gotten, which has me wondering if, that's going to tie into the mystery box with Ruby. Is perhaps Susan Ruby's mother, which would make the doctor her great-great-grandfather? Is there something else going on? Is Ruby some sort of one of these toy maker beings like we saw with Maestro last episode? So there's a lot of different questions, but there is definitely something being built up here with Susan with those references. And then we also have the snow thing coming back too, which again I felt is a little bit like, oh look, here's the mystery box, it's showing up, but I did like that it tied back into other elements of the story, such as the discussion about faith at the end, about faith, we all fade away at the end too, but snow isn't snow unless it falls. It added some poeticism to the episode that that thematically I think underscored some of the ideas in a really beautiful way, rather than it just being this nebulous mystery box. So yes, it stays sort of thematic rather than anything that tangibly matters to the plot, which I kind of like better, honestly, for something like a mystery box. Like, if you're going to have a mystery box, I like it to do two things. One, not distract from the main story being told. It's not going to be like, oh, look, we're going to stop everything to talk about the mystery box, or it's like, this whole story started to get silenced to talk about the mystery box. Like, have it sprinkled in, but tell the story you're telling, which this episode stayed focused on. It came up, but it didn't distract from the story, and it didn't be this random other thing. And then also use the mystery box as it evolves to talk about the themes of the episode at hand, and so enhance the episode through the mystery box. And I think this episode did both of those in a way that I think last episode with Maestro didn't do. Like, the stuff with Ruby's mystery box going on with her kind of felt ancillary to what was going on when Maestro tried to kill her, and they weren't able to. So that felt just sort of like, oh, again, it's just a thing that saves Ruby. It kind of distracts from the episode and distracts from the point and doesn't really emphasize anything. Here, though, I think it's used to great effect. So liked that. But then also a couple, I guess these are like two Moffatisms. What was it here that I wrote them down so I don't forget them. Oh, two little Moffatisms that came up that, like, one I didn't mind and one I dislike heavily. One was the quick reference to fish fingers and custard that the Doctor makes, which is clearly a reference to the 11th Doctor's pilot episode, where he eats fish fingers and custards, which was Moffat's first episode as showrunner. I don't mind that. It's a cute little reference. It's very coy. The Moffatism that I disliked, though, was and it's just a small moment, so I won't harp on it too much, but there was just a moment where the Doctor says, like, can you write a diary with drums? I bet I could. And it's a moment like that where the Doctor's like talking about how he's kind of he's a little bit full of himself, a little bit like, I think kind of a lot of myself, and I'm unique and special and can do different weird things that other people can't. And that's an element of a lot of Moffat's writing. It's not just Doctor Who. Sherlock did this a lot, like very special boys. The Doctor, and like how clever they are is a word that he likes to use. And frankly, I don't like that characterization of the Doctor as much, of like him being like full of himself in a flippant way. I don't mind him being arrogant, like David Tennant's original Doctor, the 10th Doctor, was. So I don't mind like arrogance being a character flaw, but Moffat rarely writes it as a character flaw. More just his like, oh look, aren't they just so clever? And especially coming off of last episode's moment that I really loved, where the Doctor says, "I'm no genius. Sometimes genius is just a lot of hard work." I loved that moment with the Doctor. Absolutely a great message for the Doctor to be sending. So to have that little aspect be added to the 15th Doctor's personality, that little Moffatism, I'm like, I could leave that. Please don't pick that up as like a part of the 15th Doctor's character. Don't need that as much. So that felt like a little bit of a Moffatism that I could do without, frankly, even though, again, generally like Moffat overall. Trying to think if there's anything else here. I mean, I kind of touched upon the politics of the episode. I thought all of that was really great. It managed to talk about a lot of different things without feeling like it was overly weighted down by them. The thoughts and prayers thing, for example, was very on the nose. Like, oh, people die, and we're just going to send thoughts and prayers. Again, it's going to this era of Doctor Who is definitely not pulling its punches, and I'm loving that for Doctor Who. You know, there's been this reticence in so many mainstream science fiction shows nowadays, like Star Trek, I think, is a good example of this, Star Wars too, to try to just be like, we're not going to offend anybody. We want to be for everyone, even the people who rant about, your stuff is woke, who you're never going to please anyways. Like, you're never going to please the bigots. Their whole job is to build outrage and make money off the outrage they stoke against supposed woke media. So unless you're overtly catering to them by just trying to make it like, oh, we're not going to say anything at all, it means that you're ultimately going to dilute what your messages are, dilute your stories, and end up with a Rise of Skywalker situation that I think is, and even like to a degree, Strange New Worlds of Star Trek kind of touches upon that too, to a degree from time to time, where it just kind of doesn't say anything in its effort to try to not offend anyone. And I'm loving this era of Doctor Who, where it's just going like, nah, screw you. We have a point of view. Fuck you if you're not in for it. Maestro, the actor who played Maestro, the drag queen, they said that, fuck the bigots, they're not real fans, and I'm here for it. And, your mileage may vary on how on the nose some of these political statements are, and certainly I think you could end up with an Orphan 55 situation where it's a little bit too preachy, but here I think, being a little bit on the nose is kind of always been Doctor Who's bread and butter, to a degree, being a little cheeky with it and a little like, yeah, we're definitely talking about that thing. So I enjoy it. I think it handles it rather well. The one thing it almost leaned into that I didn't like was this moment where the Doctor sort of chastises this woman for having faith. And I thought that was a little bit unnuanced at first, because yes, there's a great point to be said about how this woman takes her faith in this, system that she's a part of. Just at face value, and it causes her to not think, and how, religious institutions, capitalism, all these different things just sort of take that and manipulate. It's like, this is the way the world is, or this is how everything should be. You are naturally this way. And it takes that faith and warps it for their own ends. So that is true. And I think this episode gets at that. But the thing I always have is like, faith in and of itself is not a bad thing. Yes, religious institutions or, groups that take advantage of that faith or manipulate it are awful. But faith in and of itself is not bad. And I think having faith can be a really beautiful thing when, put in towards the right way. Faith in humanity, faith in others, faith that there is goodness in the world, regardless of everything. I think that's a necessary thing for us to have, to be able to have hope that the future can be better. So I was a little bit disappointed in the episode kind of having that oh yeah, faith is bad sort of element coming from the Doctor. But then the episode turns it around and does have that moment at the end where the Doctor's like, just because I don't really always like it doesn't mean I don't have it. And there was a little bit of nuance injected at the moment of the girl still having her father in her heart, and she may put it into a more overt faith ways, he's not dead, he's in heaven, and the Doctor maybe not believing in heaven, but not necessarily going to take that away from her either, and because it can still be meaningful and it can still be helpful in many ways, and so I thought that little injection of nuance at the end there was really great. So that I like that they turned that around right then, because I was a little bit miffed at that moment until that point. So I'm glad it ended on that. Trying to think if there's anything else. One other thing too I picked up on is the hospital says that Millie Gibson Ruby is 3,000 years old, which could just be that it's 3,000 years from when Ruby was born, and so the medical records of the ambulance just looked up her records from old Earth from 3,000 years ago. But it also could be an oblong reference to the fact that maybe Ruby is older than she appears. Who knows? So I was curious to see how people were thinking about that. I tend to think it's just, they pulled up her old records from old Earth, and so it just counted from there. But perhaps not. Overall, I think that's everything. What did you think about this episode of Doctor Who? I really loved Boom. Thought it was my favorite one so far, besides maybe Wild Blue Yonder. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, I would just say, if you get the chance, please consider checking out the trailer for my movie. It'll be down below in the links. But beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper. And I will see you next time.